Hey everybody, this is Anthony with VR Game Rankings. You are now tuned in to our daily vlog series for Wednesday, December 27th. This is episode 62 of our daily vlog series. Now, as you might know, the daily vlog series is basically a VR news show where we cover the latest VR news. Sometimes we cover recent games I've been playing, stuff like that, games that are coming up soon. Things of that nature, okay? Well, right now, VR news is very light, and that is an understatement. Let me tell you, I woke up today, took a look at all the various news sites, took a look at the various subreddits, bounced around, looked at some stuff, just not a heck of a lot going on. So basically, I have to zig when everybody else is zagging, so I have to go in a different direction. And so what I'm going to do today is I thought it would be interesting to take a look at some of the best VR developers in the business, okay? And what I decided to do was I wanted to limit this to VR developers that have released at least 2 games, okay? So they have to have 2 games that are currently available that you can buy now under their belt. So that eliminated a lot of really heavy-hitting VR developers that maybe have only made 1 big game. They're working on another game. They might even have 2 games in development or whatever it may be, but they only have 1 game that is currently available right now. So those developers have been excluded from consideration. And instead, what I'm doing is I am focusing in on what I believe are the 10 best developers in terms of just hammering it with really good content. So we're going to go ahead and go through this list and just kind of get into it and see where we end up. Okay, so number 1 on my list is Croteam. Okay, and Croteam is number 1 because of several reasons. First of all, they're number 1 because, man, they are just prolific. Do you know how many games these guys have brought to the table? I believe they started things off with Serious Sam: The Last Hope, which was designed specifically for VR. I might be wrong about that. Maybe it was Serious Sam: The First Encounter that was their first one, but it was one of those 2 games was their first VR game. Then they followed it up with the other one, I believe Serious Sam: The First Encounter. Then a little bit later on, we got Serious Sam: The Second Encounter. Then we get the Talos Principle VR, and then we get Serious Sam 3 VR BFE. So Croteam has just absolutely been hammering it when it comes to high-end VR games. Now, Croteam was founded back in 1993. They are based in Zagreb, Croatia, which I'm going to murder a lot of places where these different developers are based and countries and also founders' names and stuff. I'm going to be murdering a lot of this stuff, so I apologize for that. But these guys are based in Zagreb, Croatia, and that's why they're called Croteam. You know, it's a bunch of Croatian developers. I believe it was 6 of them that started this off back in 1993. And of course, they're famous for the Serious Sam series that was popular in the late 90s and early 2000s. And now they've been really hammering it on the VR front. So we want to give a lot of respect to Croteam because they just have continued to bang away at it. And one of the best developers in VR. I don't think there's any question about it. Okay, so at number 2, I'm actually going to go with Cloudhead Games. Now, Cloudhead Games has only been around since 2012. They are based in Qualicum Beach, British Columbia. I might be mispronouncing that as well. They do have a satellite studio in Vancouver now. And of course, Cloudhead Games is famous for the Gallery Episode 1 Call of the Starseed. Now, in the very early days of VR, we're talking back in April of 2016, Cloudhead Games, this game, you know, Episode 1, the Gallery Episode 1, was probably one of the most AAA-esque games that we had in VR at that time. And now we have a lot more AAA type fare. But back in those days, they were pretty much the only game in town with the Gallery, and that's one of the reasons HTC Vive worked out a deal with them, and it was packaged with the HTC Vive for a while. And Call of the Starseed is easily considered one of the better VR games out there. But the reason I have them on this list is because they released Heart of the Emberstone this year, not too long ago, actually. And Heart of the Emberstone, I've talked about it before. It's got a lot of problems. It's got a lot of issues. But when everything is clicking in that game, it is absolutely fantastic. Incredible 3D audio, some of the best graphics in the VR industry, period. Great storyline. Just, you really buy into the experience. It's almost a movie-like experience when everything is working well. So I want to give a lot of love to Cloudhead Games. High quality studio right there. Okay, number 3, I'm going to go with Gunfire Games. And you want to talk about a prolific developer, this is another one. So Gunfire Games, we have to kind of go back to Vigil Games, which was owned by THQ, makers of the Darksiders series. And so what happened is, obviously THQ went under, and THQ had to sell off all their properties, and so Vigil Games was no more. But David Adams, who was one of the original members of Vigil Games, he went ahead and founded Gunfire Games back in 2014, and a lot of the Vigil Games staff came over to Gunfire Games and worked at Gunfire Games, and they're working there now. And Gunfire has done a lot in the VR industry so far. They started out with Hero-Bound Spirit Champion, which was their very first VR game. Then they followed that up with Chronos. They worked with Oculus for Dead and Buried. I believe Oculus Studios kind of helped out with that. It was kind of a collaborative affair there. And then, of course, recently they have brought From Other Suns. So Gunfire Games has been very prolific in terms of their output, easily considered one of the better VR developers that we have. Chronos is widely considered to be one of the best third-person VR games we've ever seen up to date. And From Other Suns is outstanding. Dead and Buried is a great game as well. And even Hero-Bound Spirit Champion is worth taking a look at. So Gunfire Games, one of our most talented VR developers for sure. Okay, in the 4th spot, I go ahead and I put Insomniac Games. This has been another prolific developer. Now, Insomniac was started way back in the PlayStation 1 days. It was founded in 1994 by Ted Price, and their very first game was Disruptor on PlayStation. And then, of course, a little bit later on down the line, they created Spyro. And they had the Spyro games, and they did those for a while. And then basically they've been working with Sony since the very beginning, and they continue to work with Sony even to this day. But at a certain point in, I don't know if it was around like 2012, 2013, they decided to kind of break away from Sony. And they've made a few Xbox games. Of course, they made Sunset Overdrive was one of the games. Fuse, I believe, was another game that they made. So they are not just a Sony studio, so they've stepped out of that a little bit. And they've also been banging away for Oculus. They've definitely had a great relationship with Oculus. Obviously, Ted Price and Jason Rubin go back to the original PlayStation days with Crash Bandicoot and Spyro and kind of that camaraderie that they had back in those days. But what has Insomniac Games provided us? Well, they provided us with Feral Rights on the Oculus Rift, which is a third-person action-adventure kind of a game. Then they came out with Edge of Nowhere, which was very powerful, kind of almost like an Uncharted in VR. And then, of course, The Unspoken, the one-on-one battler, which recently received a little bit of single-player content with the Acolytes. So Insomniac Games has definitely provided some heat. Now, we don't know what they're working on going forward, but, I mean, they are working on Spider-Man for PlayStation. Now, we haven't heard anything about VR, but here's the thing. These guys have made 3 VR games in very recent times. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if Spider-Man for PlayStation 4 ends up actually having a VR mode, but maybe we won't find out about it until much later. So that is Insomniac Games, one of the better developers we've seen. At number 5, I have Supermassive Games, and this is a very talented developer right here. They're famous for the Until Dawn series, of course. Now, Supermassive is based in Guildford, Surrey in the UK. Could be mispronouncing that, my apologies. And they primarily develop games for Sony. I think if you look at all the games that they've developed, I think there's only one game that wasn't on a Sony platform, and that was like a Windows game. But other than that, they've been all Sony. Now, what have they brought us? Well, first, they started off with Until Dawn Rush of Blood. I mean, how incredible is Until Dawn Rush of Blood? Still probably one of the best horror experiences you can get in VR. A very unique game because you're kind of on rails on this roller coaster that's going through haunted house, like a haunted house amusement park from a twisted amusement park scenario. Really great game. I mean, this is a game where it will definitely scare the living daylights out of you at certain points during Until Dawn Rush of Blood. A great game for YouTube. So many people put people into this game just to get their reactions, their screams, and all that type of thing. So it's a great game for that. But they also made Tumble VR. A lot of people forget about Tumble VR. Tumble VR basically uses one PlayStation Move controller, and it's kind of like Jenga VR, basically, is what you could say. You're manipulating objects, stacking them on top of each other, and trying to solve various puzzles. And what I like about Tumble VR, because you don't hear a lot about Tumble VR, but for me, the thing about Tumble VR that is so special is the production quality. Just every little thing that happens, every little noise that's made, just a lot of polish and a lot of spit shine when it comes to Tumble VR. I think it's a very impressive game. And of course, in regards to Supermassive Games, they got two absolutely monster games that are coming very soon. On January 24th, The Inpatient, which this could easily be one of the biggest PSVR games of January. I mean, it's going to be one of the biggest PSVR games of January. This game was originally going to be a November release, and it wisely was pushed back, which I think was the right idea because Skyrim came out and just overshadowed everything. So I think it was a great move to push back The Inpatient, coming on January 24th. And of course, they have Bravo Team as well. So Supermassive Games continues to bang away and provide some serious thunder for the Sony platform. So definitely got to give some respect to Supermassive Games. Okay, number 6 on my list is Valve. Yeah, we forget about Valve. Now, Valve had, of course, the lab. And at VR Game Rankings, I feel like we should break the lab up into its separate components and give each one of them their proper due. And that's what we did at VR Game Rankings. We broke everything up. Some of them we put into the games category, and some of them we put into the VR experiences category. And so the games that I want to celebrate when it comes to Valve is Zortex 26XX. This is one of the most underrated VR games there is. I truly believe that if this game was made on its own as its own individual game by some other developer, this game would get rants and raves, but because it's part of the lab, people kind of discount it and don't give it quite as much respect as I think it deserves. Zortex is a fantastic game, and this is a game that you can play in an endless mode. You can keep playing it. It's got a ton of gameplay, and it's so polished, it's so dialed in, it has crystal clear visuals. They've also got Longbow in there. Longbow is one of the best VR games we have on the Vive. It's something that you put a lot of new VR players in because it's simple, it's colorful, it's clean, it's crisp, got great audio. And then there's Slingshot. And just think about the comedy factor of Slingshot. Slingshot is hilarious. All of the tracer cores that you're firing off and blowing up these various boxes in this warehouse, it's just absolutely hilarious what these guys talk about as you put them into the Slingshot and you sling them out there. And so when I look at all the various Valve produced games that were in the lab, they did an outstanding job. Now, just a little bit about Valve. Valve was founded back in 1996 by Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington. It's headquartered in Bellevue, Washington. And obviously, they started everything off with Half-Life back in 1998. And I can tell you, I actually was a PC gamer back in 1998. And I remember the release of Half-Life, the very first Half-Life. And when it hit with an incredible bang. I mean, it blew everybody away. That's why Half-Life is such a major series. Now, it gets a lot of hype from Half-Life 2, which came out in the early 2000s, but the original Half-Life started it all off. And then the other thing that we need to mention in regards to Valve is they have those 3 mystery projects that are coming. Probably at least 1 or 2 of them should arrive in 2018. So they have 3 big VR games that are going to be coming sometime in 2018. I kind of believe that one of them will be a Portal VR experience, but we haven't really heard anything about that. But I just think Portal is such a natural for a VR translation. In fact, we already saw Portal Stories. And if you play the Talos Principle VR, it is very Portal-esque. So you can see how well that type of game works in a VR environment. Okay, number 7 developer I want to get into is Crytek. Crytek has released 2 really primetime games for VR platforms. They started it off with Robinson the Journey, one of the better VR games that we have for sure, and a very underrated game. Robinson the Journey came out on PlayStation VR and didn't get a ton of fanfare in the beginning. And then later, of course, it did come to the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive. And I don't know, I feel like Robinson the Journey just doesn't get enough credit because I know that I played it mostly on PlayStation VR. And when I had it on PSVR, just going to that world, just being in that environment, the jungle and exploring around in dinosaurs. I mean, come on, dinosaurs in VR are like a match made in heaven. Robinson the Journey doesn't have a lot of action. It doesn't have a lot of like high impact combat or anything like that. Really, there's no combat. It's kind of more of a point and click type of game for VR, but damn, does it do such a good job. I really liked Robinson the Journey. Incredibly underrated. And then The Climb. And we talked about The Climb yesterday because it was only $10. I actually was able to play that a little bit yesterday. I picked it up. It is a fabulous game. I've barely gotten into it. I barely scratched the surface, but I can already tell that The Climb is a really interesting game, and it's probably a game where I'm going to get a little bit of exercise because you're constantly reaching up as you climb up. You know, you're constantly moving your hands and reaching, you know, trying to grab that next ledge. And so you probably get a little bit of exercise out of that, which is great as well. Crytek was founded back in 1999. It's based in Frankfurt, Germany. And Far Cry was their first big game, of course, back in 2004. And of course, then they obviously had Crysis. And, you know, everybody always says, can it run Crysis? I mean, it's kind of a meme at this point. But Crytek, outstanding developer. So I put them at number 7. Okay, number 8 on my list is CCP Games. And I know CCP Games, a lot of people might have some negative thoughts towards CCP Games, mainly because they came out not too long ago saying that they're basically going to back away from VR, that they've had some financial difficulties in terms of bringing out these VR games and not getting the kind of sales they've expected. And so when some people think of CCP Games, they kind of have a little bit of a negative reaction. But we have to remember that CCP Games brought out Eve Valkyrie, which is a really outstanding game. Now, of course, it started out quite expensive at $59.99, but now you can get Eve Valkyrie for a much cheaper price. It's been on sale a lot of different times. They've added the Warzone content, and they've added some other content as well. So you have Eve Valkyrie. There's also Eve Gunjack. I've played Eve Gunjack actually on PlayStation VR, and I thought it was actually quite entertaining and quite fun. Not a bad game in its own right and very inexpensive. And then, of course, they brought Spark. And Spark has been an outstanding game. I really think Spark is a great game. Started out on PlayStation VR. It has now come to Steam. It has now come to Oculus. And it's recently been on sale for $10. And if you can still grab Spark for $10, I highly recommend it because it just has a good feel to it. And, you know, we were talking about Portal a little bit earlier when we were talking about Valve, and there's something about Spark that just the aesthetic of the game, just the very clean, polished aesthetic of it, reminds me of Portal to a very slight degree, which I know sounds kind of weird because this is more of like a Racket Hollow Ball or a Racket NX or something like that. It seems to be more related to those kinds of games, a Tron style game really, than something like Portal. But for some reason it does remind me a little bit of Portal, but that is Spark. So CCP Games has done a great job. By the way, did you guys know that CCP stands for Crowd Control Productions? I never knew that, but I was looking it up today, getting some information on these companies. CCP Games was founded back in 1997. It's based in Reykjavik, Iceland. I know I probably just murdered that, of course. And it's famous for EVE Online. You know, everybody knows CCP Games for EVE Online, and that's been their focus there. But they did kind of jump on VR rather aggressively with EVE Valkyrie and EVE Gunjack and then Spark. And now, of course, they have backed away from VR, but I believe they will come back. So I believe eventually they will come back to VR and make some more VR games somewhere down the line. So I'm not going to hold it against them that they decided to back away from VR right now. Number 9 on our list is Alchemy Labs. And you know, Alchemy Labs has provided, of course, Job Simulator, and they've also provided Rick and Morty virtual reality. And both of these games are outstanding. And the thing about both of them is the interactivity with your hands. That's where I really feel that Alchemy Labs is like a cut above a lot of other developers out there, because when you get into VR and when you actually have hand presence in VR, you want to do things with your hands. You want to pick up objects. You want to manipulate objects. And that's the thing that Alchemy Labs probably does better than any other developer that we have in VR right now. And I think that's a big reason they were acquired by Google in May of this year. Alchemy Labs was founded back in 2010 in Boston, Massachusetts, but they're now headquartered in Austin, Texas. And obviously we have to mention they do have Vacation Simulator, which is coming early in well, not necessarily early in 2018, but it's coming sometime in 2018. And of course, Rick and Morty is going to be coming to PlayStation VR early in 2018. So Alchemy Labs has done quite a bit of nice things for the VR community, and they're one of the better developers we have. And they're one of the few developers that have made several $1 million off their primary game. I think Job Simulator is one of the highest grossing VR games that we've seen so far because it's available on all the platforms and it's just considered a standout title. You know, it just does so many things so well. Okay, number 10 on my list is Escalation Studios. Now, this might catch you guys a little bit off guard. You might think, Escalation Studios, what the heck are you talking about here? Okay, so first of all, you have to understand, Escalation Studios did Please Don't Touch Anything 3D for VR, okay, which is the VR version of that game. And they're not on the list for this. Okay, what they're on this list for is their help with Bethesda Game Studios and also id Software. Escalation Studios behind the scenes has done a tremendous amount of work working on Skyrim VR, Fallout 4 VR, and Doom VFR. They helped out Bethesda Game Studios, they helped out id Software on all 3 of these titles, and honestly, they probably had more to do with these games hitting the various VR platforms than anything else, because I mean, I'm sure obviously Bethesda Game Studios helped them out with it, refined it, but Escalation Studios was very much involved with this. ZeniMax acquired Escalation Studios early this year, and the reason they acquired them is because of the help they were providing on Fallout 4 VR and Skyrim VR. They were doing such a good job. ZeniMax was like, we need to just buy these guys. We need to buy these guys, get them under our umbrella, and these guys can kind of be our primary VR developer under the ZeniMax label. So that was a great idea. Escalation Studios was founded back in 2007 in Dallas, Texas. It was founded by two former Ritual Entertainment developers. Tom Mustaine and Mark Tardif were the two founders of Escalation Studios. And so that's basically the top 10 developers I wanted to kind of run down today on this different episode, I guess you could say. I just wanted to kind of bring some light to some of the developers some of our best VR developers that have made at least 2 games or more in VR. And we've got some high quality developers in this list. Now, there's a lot that barely missed the cut, and I want to give a quick shout out to some of these other developers. Red Storm Entertainment. I mean, these guys have brought us Werewolves Within and Star Trek Bridge Crew. How awesome is that? CCP Games, Windlands, and Crystal Rift. Slightly Mad Studios, Project Cars, the first one, and Project Cars 2. Wolf and Wood Interactive, A Chair in a Room, and now they've recently brought The Exorcist Legion VR. Shell Games, I Expect You to Die, and Water Bears VR, 2 really great games. Zen Studios has come out with Pinball FX2 VR, Castle Storm VR, and Infinite Mini Golf. Phaser Lock Interactive, Final Approach, and Twisted Arrow, 2 really solid games. Colopal, which is Cyberpong, Titan Slayer, Dig for Destruction, and Fly to Kuma Maker. All of those VR-enabled games. Stress Level Zero, of course, with Hover Junkers and Duck Season. Pocket Money Games has brought out Dimension Hunter, Wacky Wings, and Henry the Hamster Handler. Uber Entertainment with Wayward Sky and Dino Frontier. Harmonix with Harmonix Music VR, and of course Rock Band VR. Future Town brought us Cloudlands VR Mini Golf, A10 VR, and Jibo Man, and Zen's VR with Hordes and Zion. So all of these developers have brought at least 2 games out in VR. And a lot of these developers I was really close to putting into this top 10 list, especially Red Storm Entertainment, maybe even Phaser Lock Interactive, Harmonix, so a lot of these guys could have been in that top 10. So I wanted to give them a special shout out real quick. But basically, guys, that's going to go ahead and do it for this episode. Once again, I apologize that we didn't have news today, and so had to go in a different direction. But I thought it was a good idea to kind of highlight some of the more prolific and better VR developers that we've had in this industry and give them a little bit of a shout out. And so that's what we did today. So definitely support some of these developers, check out their games, keep your eyes on what they have coming soon, because these guys continue to bring great VR games after great VR games, and we want to celebrate that and give them a little bit of respect for what they've brought to the table. So that's going to go ahead and wrap it up for today. And of course, this has been episode 62 of the VR Game Rankings Daily Vlog series. And it, of course, is Wednesday, December 27th. And I'll see everybody tomorrow. So take it easy. Later.